The UN's Human Rights Office says armed groups in Syria are killing entire families. The office confirms 111 civilians have been killed so far, but says that number may be much higher. This comes after days of deadly clashes between the new interim government and loyalists of ousted President Bashar al-Assad. Now thousands of Syrians are reportedly trying to escape the growing violence. War correspondent and CEO of the Reckoning Project, Janine di Giovanni, joins me now for more on this. Janine, thanks for coming on. I know you recently returned to Syria after being expelled from working there by the former regime in 2012. So what was it like going back after all these years?
Well, I did go back again until 2015, but working on the other side, on the rebel side. But I had not been to the regime-held areas, which is Damascus, Latakia, where the recent killings were, Homs, Hama, this part of the country. For me, it was extraordinary. First of all, to see that people who have been repressed for 4 decades, and I think that's incredibly difficult for American viewers to understand the level of state terror that came under the Assad regime. It basically meant that people were taken away in the middle of the night for criticizing the president, for writing slogans, for graffiti, for saying something during a prayer group at the mosque, and they would disappear into the notoriously brutal Assad prisons. So to see people who could talk to me, who could actually speak without fear, was remarkable, and their stories were heartbreaking. I spoke to a lot of people who went through the chemical gas attacks. Remember that Assad has gassed his own people dozens of times. And the saddest thing for me was not only had they lost their entire families, but afterwards the secret police came and fabricated a narrative that they had to lie and say that the cause of the death of all their families was the rebels. So Syria is beginning to breathe again, but it is an incredibly difficult road to create a government after 40 years and a civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and displaced 14 million people.
Janine, you say in many ways the fall of Assad means Syrians can now feel free. But what does the growing violence there now mean for hopes of democracy?
Look, I was in Iraq during the time of Saddam, when Saddam fell, and in the aftermath. You have to first see that the Alawites, who were Assad supporters, the Assad family, are Alawites. Alawites are a sect of the Shia branch of Islam. They're about 12% of the population, but they controlled everything during the 40-year rule of the Assad. So basically, they controlled the much feared secret police, the prisons. They were given the best jobs. They were the entitled people, and the Sunnis were desperately repressed, as well as other minorities. So now, with the Sunnis taking power, the government of al-Shara, it's very tentative. So what's happening now, the killings in Latakia, which is the coastal region where many of the Alawites live, is something that is absolutely heartbreaking. But in a sense, it's something that we've seen in countries that go through this post-conflict terrible growing pains. And in no way do I want to undermine it, because it's horrific, and the UN has reported entire families were killed. There also have been killings from the other side. Now, the fighters are not directly connected to the government. We don't know that yet. They could be rogue branches. In the aftermath of a long civil war and a new government, and the old government falling, you are inevitably going to have a lot of issues like this. While I was there, the government had their first national dialogue. Now, this is really important. It's a first step towards building a constitution, to addressing issues that we're all very concerned about: human rights, inclusion of women and minorities, especially the Christians. I did write a book about the Christians in Syria, and I wrote another book about the torture under the Assad regime. So it is something I know a bit about, and the Christians and the minorities are quite naturally fearful of whether or not the new government will be in some ways as repressive as the last. I don't think so. I think they are trying extremely hard, and they will need donors as well.
All right, war correspondent, CEO, and executive director at the Reckoning Project, Janine di Giovanni. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.